I'm the middle child in a family of 3 boys. I have an older brother and a younger brother. Both of them were involved in scouting while growing up. My older brother even made it all the way to Eagle Scout. My younger brother joined later, but eventually quit during Boy Scouts. For some reason, though, my parents never pushed me to join. Looking back, it's strange because I remember always feeling jealous of my older brother, Scott. Whenever my mom took me along to events like the Pinewood Derby competitions or troop celebrations, I would watch all the scouts and wish I was one of them. But the thing I envied the most were the camping trips. The scouts would head into the wilderness and spend entire weekends camping together. I went along for the ride a couple of times when my parents dropped Scott off. I'd watch them setting up tents, building campfires, and getting ready for the adventure. But since I was younger and not part of the troop, I wasn't allowed to stay. I always had to go back home with my parents. My jealousy mostly centered around my older brother because I watched him prepare for those trips. Before each one, he would bring home a tent and practice setting it up in the backyard. I was only about 7 or 8 at the time, but I remember clearly how excited I felt when I came up with the idea of doing our own camping night. My plan was simple. We'd set up the tent in our backyard and sleep in it overnight. To my young mind, that sounded like the greatest adventure imaginable. Our backyard wasn't exactly typical. Our childhood home sat in a very spacious neighborhood where the yards blended together. There weren't many fences separating properties. Instead, there were patches of trees and bushes dividing them, which made the whole place feel a bit like the wilderness. Our backyard itself was huge, and we even had a fire pit. My parents played along with the idea and helped us set everything up so we could have the full camping experience. That night, we lit the fire pit and roasted marshmallows. My little brother joined us for that part, but my parents wouldn't let him sleep in the tent. He was only 4 years old at the time, and it probably wasn't the best idea. Eventually, it got late, and my parents took him inside. They told Scott and me it was time to get ready for bed. Back then, the Game Boy SP was the handheld console everyone had. Once we were inside the tent and tucked into our sleeping bags, Scott and I pulled out our Game Boys and started playing. I remember I was playing Super Mario Bros. 2, a game I loved but could never beat as a kid. After a while, I got sleepy, so I turned to my side and tried to fall asleep. But I couldn't. I was tired yet restless. Maybe it was because I'd never slept in a sleeping bag before. Honestly, it wasn't comfortable at all. I tossed and turned for what felt like hours before I finally drifted off. When I woke up later, I was confused at first. It took me a few seconds to remember where I was. The inside of the tent was dark, barely lit by faint moonlight filtering through the fabric. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed something strange. Scott was gone. His sleeping bag was empty. The zipper of the tent was still closed, though. I figured he must have gone inside the house because he couldn't sleep. Suddenly, being alone in the tent scared me. I sat up and slowly unzipped the tent. Before crawling out, I peeked outside first. I was a kid, and part of me felt like I needed to check if the coast was clear. It wasn't. Sitting beside the fire pit in the darkness was someone. It wasn't Scott. It was a grown man. He was sitting there facing the tent. There was no way he didn't see me. I gasped and immediately zipped the tent shut again before crawling back into my sleeping bag as if that thin layer of fabric could somehow protect me. I lay perfectly still. The tent was almost completely black inside, just a dull gray glow from the moonlight. My mind was racing. I wanted to call out for my dad, hoping somehow it might be him, but I knew it wasn't. I had seen the man clearly enough. If it had been my dad, he would have said something when I poked my head out. Then I heard the chair near the fire pit scrape slightly. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I prayed the man wouldn't stand up, and if he did, I had hoped he wouldn't come toward the tent. But then I saw a shadow appear on the fabric of the tent, blocking part of the moonlight. He was right outside. I stayed frozen, thinking that if I didn't move, maybe he'd assume the tent was empty. Then I heard the zipper begin to move. Slowly. Very slowly. It slid downward just a few inches. The opening was small, but enough. I couldn't stop myself from glancing toward it. At the bottom of most tents, there's a tiny gap where the zipper doesn't fully seal. I had never noticed that before, until that night. Pressed against that small gap was an eye. Just one eye. It was staring directly at me. Even in the darkness, I could see the white of it. For a few seconds, I couldn't even scream. I was completely paralyzed. Then the eye squinted slightly, almost like the person was smiling. A smile I couldn't see. The zipper moved another inch. That's when I finally screamed. I kicked my way out of the sleeping bag, scrambling backward and knocking into the tent poles. Immediately, I heard footsteps running across the yard. A second later, the back porch light flipped on. Through the fabric of the tent, I saw the light glow as my dad burst out the back door, yelling. I heard him running through the grass, but by the time he reached the fire pit, the man was already gone. My parents called the police. I don't remember everything that happened after that. I know I ended up sleeping in my parents' room with my mom that night while the police searched the area. The whole experience was terrifying. For weeks afterward, I was emotionally shaken. Eventually, things started returning to normal. But then something happened that made the entire experience even more disturbing. About a month later, during lunch recess at my Catholic school, we were playing a game in the schoolyard. The playground was all concrete and surrounded by a fence facing the street. At one point, I ran to the fence because that was the safe zone in the game. While standing there, a man on the other side of the fence said, "Hey." I turned around. It was him. He asked me for directions to some place I don't remember now. I told him I didn't know. We weren't supposed to talk to strangers anyway. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Your name's Chris, right?" My heart felt like it stopped. I lied and said no. He smiled. "You don't remember me, do you?" he said. That was enough for me. I ran straight to one of the recess supervisors and pointed toward the fence. But when they looked, the man was gone. One of the other kids said he had seen the man too. The school immediately ended recess and called my parents. I was sent home early that day. I was absolutely certain it was the same man from the backyard. For months after that, my parents kept a very close eye on me. Eventually, life went back to normal. But even now, thinking about it makes my chest tighten. Because I know that if that man had succeeded in getting into that tent, I might not be here today. And the worst part is wondering whether he ever succeeded with someone else. I grew up in Salem, Oregon, a quiet town with that small town charm where everyone more or less knew each other. When I turned 21, I moved out and bought my first house about 50 miles away. It wasn't huge or fancy, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. Furnishing it was another story. Most of my furniture came from a mix of places. Things my parents gave me, items from their friends, and a lot of secondhand deals I found online. I spent a lot of time browsing Facebook Marketplace looking for good deals. At the time, I was driving a Ford Raptor, so picking up large items was pretty easy. One afternoon, while scrolling through listings, I came across what looked like a digital yard sale. The post showed a bunch of different items for sale. Most of it didn't interest me much, but two things immediately caught my attention. The first was a cream-colored sectional couch that looked almost brand new. The second was a Cannondale mountain bike. I didn't own a bike at the time, and the area around my house had perfect trails for riding and exercise. On top of that, the prices listed were surprisingly cheap. So I messaged the seller. The conversation was pretty typical at first. I asked a few questions about the couch and the bike. The seller replied quickly, but his answers were very short and direct. He didn't seem interested in chatting, just getting to the point. Still, he was easy to negotiate with. I offered a slightly lower price than what he listed, and he agreed without hesitation. He told me I could come pick everything up later that evening. It was summertime in Oregon and the days were long, so I figured there would still be some sunlight when I arrived. Based on the couch's size, I assumed I might have to make 2 trips to transport everything. Before leaving, I checked the address he gave me on my phone's map. The satellite view showed a large property right on the coastline. A long driveway led from the road to a big house sitting near the edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean. My first thought was honestly confusion. If someone owned a property like that, why were they selling their belongings so cheaply? Still, a deal is a deal. So I drove out there. As I got closer to the coast, the houses became noticeably nicer. Large properties, beautiful views, and expensive homes lined the area. Eventually, I reached the final road before the house. It was a long road surrounded by thick woods on both sides. Every now and then, there was a driveway branching off toward what looked like huge cliffside mansions hidden in the trees. Finally, my GPS told me to turn. The driveway was a narrow dirt road surrounded by trees. About 10 seconds after entering it, the trees opened up into a massive clearing. The house sat at the top of a small hill. It was enormous. The driveway curved up toward it, and I pulled up beside an old sedan already parked there. It looked like a Mercury Sable or something similar. What struck me immediately was how out of place the car looked. The house looked like it belonged to a millionaire. The car looked like it barely ran. I stepped out of my truck and walked up to the front door, ready to ring the doorbell. But taped to the door was a yellow sticky note. It read, "Doorbell broken. Please use back door." That seemed a little strange. I could have easily just knocked, but I followed the instructions. As I walked along the front porch toward the side of the house, I messaged the seller on Messenger to say I had arrived and was heading around back. While walking past the windows, I glanced inside a few times, but every blind was closed. When I reached the backyard, I was honestly stunned. The house sat right on the edge of a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The view was incredible. There was a large wooden deck with outdoor chairs facing the water. I walked up the steps and knocked on the sliding glass door. The glass door had a sliding blind covering it, so I couldn't see inside. I waited a minute. No response. I knocked again. Still nothing. I checked my phone. The seller hadn't responded to my message and hadn't even read it. Thinking he might be busy or in the shower, I decided to sit in one of the deck chairs for a bit. I turned it toward the ocean and watched the sunset while waiting. The view was surreal. But after a few minutes of waiting and sending a couple more messages, I still had no response. I double-checked the address again. It was definitely the right house, and the note on the front door confirmed someone expected visitors. While waiting, I decided to walk closer to the cliff to take a picture of the ocean. I stepped off the deck and walked across the neatly cut grass toward the edge. The sound of waves crashing below echoed up the cliffside. For a moment, I just stood there imagining what it would be like to live somewhere like that. Then I turned around to head back toward the house. That's when I froze. Every single window in the house now had its blinds open, and standing at each window was a person. They were perfectly still, just standing there, watching me. I stopped walking. At first, I genuinely thought it might be some kind of prank or maybe mannequins placed near the windows. But as I stepped closer, I noticed something unsettling. Every single one of them was smiling, not laughing, not talking, just standing there with wide smiles on their faces, completely motionless. Something in my gut told me I needed to leave. Immediately, I muttered to myself, "Nope, I've seen enough." Then I turned and started walking quickly around the side of the house toward the front yard. As I passed one of the side windows, I noticed something else. Earlier, that window had its blind completely closed. Now it was open too. and someone was standing there as well, watching me. That was enough. I broke into a jog back to my truck. I jumped inside, started the engine, and began reversing down the long driveway. I didn't even look at the front windows. I didn't want to see if more people were standing there. But halfway down the driveway, curiosity got the better of me. I glanced up toward the house. The front door was open, and a man was standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets, just watching me leave. I sped down the road and didn't slow down until I reached the nearest house. I pulled into the driveway and knocked on the door. A man answered. I quickly explained everything that had just happened. He looked genuinely confused and concerned. He told me he was close friends with the owner of the house next door and said the guy was rarely home. According to him, there was no way his neighbor would set up some elaborate prank like that. Right then, he called his neighbor. When the man answered, the neighbor explained the situation. There was a long pause on the phone. Then the owner said something that made my stomach twist. He wasn't home. He hadn't been home all week. I stepped in and explained the entire story myself. I described the people at the windows, the sedan in the driveway, and the man on the porch. The homeowner sounded genuinely alarmed. He asked me to send him the marketplace listing. But when I went to check it, the listing had been deleted. The messenger profile I had been talking to was now completely blank. Later that night, the homeowner called me again. The police had searched the house. They didn't find any stolen items, but all 3 doors of the house had been unlocked, and every blind in the house had been closed again. The sedan was gone. No one had any idea who those people were. But the part that still chills me is remembering the way they stood there at the windows, smiling, waiting. And it makes me wonder what would have happened if I had gone inside when that note told me to use the back door. I live with my parents in Murraysville, Pennsylvania. Our house has a really nice backyard setup, which is probably the main reason I decided to host a small party one weekend when my parents were out of town. Behind our house, we have an in-ground swimming pool and a small pool house. The backyard itself is mostly grass, but beyond that, there's a stretch of woods that runs pretty far back. The trees go at least half a mile before you reach another property. Because of that, the yard feels very private. Normally, there would be absolutely no reason for anyone to walk through those woods. There are no trails back there, and technically the land is still part of our property. That Saturday afternoon, I started setting up for the party. It was going to be a small pool gathering with some friends. Nothing crazy, maybe 20 people at most. The sky was a little cloudy, but since the party was mostly going to happen at night, it didn't really matter. I was outside carrying folding tables to set up beer pong and snacks when I suddenly heard something. A cough. Not a quick cough either. It sounded like someone clearing their throat slowly. And it definitely sounded like a grown man. The sound came from the woods. I froze instantly, still holding the table in my hands. The wind was barely moving through the trees, so the sound carried clearly. It came from just inside the tree line, not deep in the forest. Close enough that whoever made the sound could probably see me. Slowly, I set the table down and looked toward the trees. Confused was one way to describe what I felt, but unsettled would be more accurate. Nobody should have been back there. I stared at the tree line and called out, "Hello? Who's there?" No response. No footsteps. No branches snapping. Nothing. The silence made it worse. If someone had been walking through the woods, I should have heard them moving away. Instead, it felt like someone was standing completely still, watching me. I stayed there for about 20 seconds, listening carefully. The longer I stood there, the more uncomfortable I felt. Eventually, I grabbed the rest of the stuff and carried it back inside the house for a bit. I didn't want to keep standing outside alone. I called my friend Mark and asked if he could come over early to help me finish setting up. I didn't mention the cough. I didn't want to sound paranoid before the party even started. Mark arrived around 6 p.m. with some drinks, and together we finished setting up everything outside. A few times while we worked, I glanced toward the woods. Everything looked normal. Nothing moved. If someone had been there earlier, they were gone. The rest of my friends started arriving between 7 and 8 p.m. At the busiest point, there were around 20 people in the backyard. Music was playing. Some people were in the pool. Lights around the patio were on. With that many people around, the woods didn't feel creepy anymore. Still, a couple times during the night, I caught myself looking toward the trees. That cough had stuck in my mind. Around midnight, the party started winding down. By 1 a.m., most of the guests had left. I was exhausted and decided I'd clean up the mess the next day. Before going inside, I did a quick walk around the backyard. I checked around the pool, looked behind the pool house, glanced at the woods again. Everything seemed completely normal. The pool water was still and calm under the lights. Satisfied, I locked the sliding back door and went upstairs. I brushed my teeth, got into bed and scrolled on my phone for a bit. After about half an hour, I put the phone down and tried to sleep. Another 30 minutes passed. Then I heard something. A splash. Not a small splash like something falling into the pool. It sounded exactly like someone jumping into the deep end. My eyes snapped open. I stayed perfectly still, listening. A few seconds later, I heard it. Swimming. Actual swimming strokes cutting through the water. My first thought was that maybe one of my friends had stayed behind and decided to go for a late-night swim. But that didn't make sense. Everyone had left, and none of my friends would sneak back like that. I checked my phone. 2 a.m. Slowly, I got out of bed and walked toward the window that overlooked the backyard. I kept the lights off in my room. I didn't want whoever was outside to see me first. When I looked down at the pool, I saw a man swimming calmly from one end to the other. At first, I tried to recognize him, but the pool lights illuminated his face just enough for me to realize something. I had never seen him before. Not at the party. Not anywhere. I opened the window and yelled, "Hey, who's that?" The man stopped swimming. Slowly, he turned his head and looked up toward my window. Even from that distance, I could tell something was off. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look confused. He just stared at me. Then he began swimming toward the shallow end. He climbed out of the pool. That's when I realized how tall he was. He stood there dripping water for a couple seconds, looking toward the house. I expected him to run away. Instead, he started walking toward the sliding glass door. Fast. Not running, but walking with purpose, almost like he already knew exactly where he was going. I shouted again, "Hey, who are you?" No response. Then I heard it. The sliding door downstairs opened. I know I locked it. I'm absolutely certain I locked it. But I heard it slide open, then slide shut again. I ran to my bedroom door and locked it immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. I grabbed my phone and texted Mark asking if he had noticed anyone stay behind at the party. But I didn't wait for a response. I dialed 911. I whispered to the operator that there was someone inside my house. As I gave my address, I heard footsteps downstairs. Wet footsteps. Slow. Each step made a soft sticking sound as his feet lifted from the floor. He wasn't running. He wasn't searching randomly. He was walking directly toward the stairs. Each step on the staircase creaked as he climbed. Then I heard him reach the second floor. The hallway floor creaked. His footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. I could hear water dripping onto the wood floor. Then the door handle moved. Once. Twice. Then a third time, harder. The operator was speaking on the phone, but I barely heard her. My entire focus was on that door. After the third attempt, the handle stopped moving. There was a long silence. Then came 3 slow knocks. I turned on speakerphone and spoke loudly so he could hear. "I'm on the phone with police. They're coming." Silence. Then a man's voice spoke from the other side of the door. Low. Calm. "It's me. Open the door." He sounded like a man in his 30s. I replied, "I don't know you. Leave now." Another long pause. 5 seconds. Maybe more. Then I heard him turn and walk away quickly. His wet footsteps moved down the hallway, down the stairs. A few seconds later, I heard the front door open and slam shut. I stayed inside my room until the police arrived. When they finally came and searched the house, the evidence was obvious. A trail of water stretched from the back door, across the living room, up the staircase, all the way to my bedroom door. None of my friends had stayed behind it. Everyone confirmed it. The police never found the man. But I'm convinced the cough I heard in the woods earlier that day was him, watching, waiting for the party to end. And sometimes I think about what might have happened if I had opened that door.